Good evening and welcome to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors event. Also, happy Women's History Month. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Are you ready for a wonderful conversation about a wholly unique type of book? Well, you've come to the right place. For our featured author tonight, Sarah Krasnostein begins with a Mennonite choir performing on a subway platform. A fleeting moment of witness that sets her on a fascinating journey to discover why people need to believe in absolute truths and what happens when their beliefs crash into her own. Some of the people she interviews believe in things many people do not: ghosts, UFOs, and creation. Some believe in things such as dying with dignity and autonomy and living with integrity and compassion. Unconventional and entertaining, the stories of the believer culminate in an unforgettable exploration of the human condition. Sarah is a writer and a lawyer with a doctorate in criminal law. Born in Charlottesville, Virginia, she divides her time between Melbourne and Australia and New York. I wasn't expecting it to be that far. Sarah's first book, The Trauma Cleaner, won Australia's Victorian Prize for Literature, where it was a runaway bestseller. Joining her is author Sohaila Abdulali. Her recent book, What We Talk About When We Talk About Rape, is available in 7 languages now and has helped change the global conversation about sexual violence. She is also the author of 2 novels and 3 children's books. She joins us from New York. Please join both of these fabulous authors for an interesting discussion tonight. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sohaila.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, how are you?
I wish you were here so I could hug you.
I know, same here. I can at least look at your beautiful face.
Same. So this book is fantastic. And if I didn't love you, I might hate you just a little bit. It's really excellent. So I'm really excited to talk about it. And maybe we should start with the reading.
I will happily do that. And please excuse if I make any mistakes. I mean, I know I wrote the words, but I'm more familiar with how they sit on the page than how they sound in the mouth. So I'm going to do my best. I'm reading from the start of the chapter about a remarkable woman called Annie Whitlock, who is a death doula. And if you are unfamiliar with that profession, as I was when we first met, then hopefully it's explained in the bit that I'm going to read. All right. This situation is not common, but it is the most mundane thing imaginable. To knock on someone's door and be let in. To see your photos in their photos, wedding, school, holidays, to look at their teenage son and see your own son a decade on, to sit on their chair by their fireplace laughing, to use their bathroom and dry your hands on the towel still damp from their own clean hands. This is also not common, also the most mundane thing imaginable. Katrina, 59, has a husband named Peter, 3 stepsons, 1 biological son. Katrina has a friend named Carol, whom she's known for 35 years and on whose lap she is currently resting her blanketed feet. Katrina has a warm home, her own patch of sky over the deck out back, a lounge in which to sun herself, a full fruit bowl in the kitchen, some mild annoyance at Pete being behind with replacing the carpet in the front room, also cancer, blurred vision, light sensitivity, a racing heart, extreme nausea, the shakes. Katrina has, if she's lucky, 6 months left. This is not common. It has taken a year to make contact with Katrina. It is, as you would expect, difficult to find a patient in palliative care who wants to make the time to talk to me. Use my name, Katrina says, directing me to throw another pine cone on fire. The first time I stumbled across the words death doula, they clobbered me. Strong words made stronger by the drum of their alliteration, but that wasn't it. It was the startling directness about a matter that concerns us all, and which we talk about rarely and only in swerving euphemisms. Not with us anymore, not long for this world, to pass away, to lose the battle with, to lose one's life, as though it were a wallet in the back seat of a taxi driving away. I liked that frankness and I feared it. Also, I had no real idea what the term meant. I understood vaguely what death doulas must do only because I was familiar with birth doulas, trained professionals who provide emotional, physical, and educational support to mothers before, during, and after labor. 38 years old and an entire profession a mystery. You know that Leonard Cohen song, Annie Whitlock asked me early on, where there's a crack, that's where the light comes in. Well, where there's a crack at the hospital or with the doctors or in the family, that's where the death doula comes in. Annie lives in a suburban house, distinguished from its neighbors only by the string of Tibetan prayer flags on the front porch batting in the breeze like lashes. That and the fact that her backyard contains an enormous gold-painted Buddha and the living quarters of a senior Tibetan Buddhist monk. Annie has to tilt her shaven head backward to look up at most people through glasses that magnify her already large eyes, and has a habit of emphasizing emotionally exciting information with a puff of breath that reminds me of a small child playing with a toy car. This lends weight to her own evaluation of herself, childlike in the Buddhist sense of beginner's mind. But it is not quite the reason why she will say at the age of 66, I don't know the rules of life, how you react, what you say. She hates the word client, finds it extremely hard to accept money for the work that she does. On the one hand, she is highly trained and has to be able to support herself if she is to continue providing this type of service. On the other, she would not be as effective at what she does if it was simply a commercial transaction. She's a perpetual intimate stranger. Though she once texted me with an offer to be my death doula should I die in time, and on another occasion discreetly sent through a picture of the flower arrangement on a corpse she had recently washed and shrouded, Annie's interest in dying and death cannot accurately be characterized as morbid because there's nothing gloomy about her. It's less the case that these are topics she discusses too much, more that we discuss them too little.
Yes, you're still fabulous. So when I read the book and looked at all the 6 people that you chose, I mean, the burning question was, why these 6? What was it about these 6 people that you wrote about in this book? And you've made it's like a thriller, you're dispersing them. And so they fit together, but even I can't really figure out exactly why. So maybe you can talk a little about that.
So when I set out to write a book with all of these very different stories, I deliberately wanted to make a house of unlike things. That difference was key to what I was hoping to do. And they sit, all of these 6 stories, the ghost hunters and the evangelical scientists, the death doula and Katrina, and the others that I interviewed, they sit on a spectrum of rationality, is one way of looking at them, with kind of the fundamentalist evangelical people at one end, and Annie and Katrina and Lynn, who I write about. I met her 4 months after she was released from prison, where she spent half her life for murdering her abusive husband. So those women sit at the other end. And what they have in common is that they were all telling themselves stories to close the gap between the world as it is, with all of its ineluctably difficult parts, injustice, cruelty, uncertainty, death, illness, and the world that we would love for it to be. And so these kind of it was almost a protective armor that they had built of story to make that gap smaller. And the way that they sit on that spectrum, I think, has to do with the size of the story that they told, the spaciousness of it, its elasticity. So at one end, the missionaries are a good example of this. It was a very neat, perfectly defended, suspiciously neat and perfectly defended story that they had clung onto. Whereas Annie and Lynn and Katrina had a much roomier, elastic story that made room for all the bad parts to sit next to all the good parts and not determine how they thought of themselves, how they used their energy or their time, and they were comfortable with the mess. but still kind of had this, very clear purpose and very clear explanation about why they were here and what they were doing. So I found it interesting how there were different ways of manifesting this very human desire for certainty. And each of them in different ways reminded me of the tendency in myself, and how, if we're honest with ourselves, we all kind of tilt into these stories, these magical thoughts, and wishful thinking from time to time, if not more frequently.
That makes sense. I mean, it's interesting because you said, and you have this sentence in the book that I think really sums up maybe what you just said too, is, I believe we are united in the emotions that drive us into the beliefs that separate us.
Yes.
So yeah. Okay, do you want to talk about that a bit? It's like the commonality.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it now, and it's so funny that, well, it's not funny, but it is ironically funny that it always feels new to us. This fact that rational intellect alone doesn't move the world. You open up your Facebook or whatever social media you use, and you can see it on a daily basis, that if we were swayed by fact, there would be none of the divisions that we're seeing. So it's not a new discovery. And I think, I was reading it the other day, I was rereading Freud's 1917 essay on group psychology and the ego, and how, this human susceptibility to influence, particularly in times of anxiety. And I was thinking that it's always times of anxiety. That's part of the human condition. And we do kind of have this very, very strong emotional desire for certainty and meaning and purpose and a sense of agency. What we then do with it is how we, get locked into these divisions. But we could perhaps short circuit a lot of those discussions if we just went to the kind of emotional motivation that's at the heart of it. But it's very difficult to do that, particularly, where the beliefs are very triggering or activating for us.
Yeah, and it seems like, every author has the couple of things that they keep coming back to. And I cannot let this pass without showing everybody your first book, The Trauma Cleaner. And it's interesting to me, the parallels between these two books, because The Trauma Cleaner is about a person who cleans houses. And one of the 6 people in your new book is someone who clears houses of ghosts. And so it seems that for you, it's all about making order, how people make order out of chaos. But at the same time, you want to value differences. And maybe that's sort of the heart of the conflict that we all feel, is we want to put things in order, but we want to be open. So how do you reconcile that?
I mean, that's the problem. That's kind of, I'm not sure if it's possible, but I believe the same as anyone else in this book that it's worth trying. And yeah, I think that, I don't know who said it, but it's maybe we all only have one story that we're always returning to. And, I'm always interested, I am interested in what people are telling me, but I'm more interested in that understory. Why are they saying it? How are they saying it? What is their face doing while they're saying it? What do they want me to know? And, where does this come from? And so that idea of the messiness of life, all of the crap, I'm sorry, that's not the technical term, but that we, of the past and the present, how does it show up, for better or worse? What could we be doing more fruitfully with everything that haunts us? And so, that was what I'm thinking generally with most stories, but also specifically with the ghost chapters and Rob, who is the house clearer. I wasn't seeing what he was seeing. He was there engaging with the bad spooks and the good spooks and driving them towards the light to leave these houses less haunted or not haunted. And I was, kind of not really interested in whether or not it was true, whether or not, the house was now cleared of a paranormal presence. What was more interesting to me was the meaning of believing, truly or otherwise, I don't have any empirical basis, but the meaning for these people who called on him, the meaning for him in this work of, eliminating these haunting presences. What does that mean in terms of, our human lives? How is it relevant for the rest of us?
I don't think it's that you have just one, any of us has just one story to tell. It's more like we all have one quest. And maybe the quest that you're getting to is the order, because it's not at all. So now that you brought up one of the people in the book, let's talk about some of the people in the book, because I'm assuming people who are watching haven't read it. When I was reading it, I was amazed at how open-hearted and tolerant you were. And then just when I thought you were too good to be true, you started to get a little judgmental, which made me really happy. But which of these 6 people was really difficult for you? I know which was for me, but which was hard for you?
I mean, I would have to say the missionaries in certain respects and the creationists at the Creation Museum. On the one hand, I am interested in the emotional motivation. We can get to the vulnerability at the heart of that story, and we can all say, nothing that's human is alien to me. And that serves us until it doesn't, because ideas do have real life consequences, as we see with the politicization of public health or racial justice or climate change or any of the other innumerable examples. So I, cannot just sit in the discomfort infinitely. At some point, I kind of do have to get my knuckles bloody and say that it's not good enough. It's quite hateful, and it's also dangerous. But having said that, there is something very compelling about sitting with people who do and are honest about the fact that they believe you're going to hell. And then, that's not what the day is about. The day is about taking the kids to the playground and bitching about the traffic and talking about the weather or complaining about the city. Like, it's, we do have these commonalities. So perhaps they're even more important than, sitting there quite comfortably talking about, Buddhist texts or, the faults of the criminal justice system, things that are reflexively easy and comfortable for me to do in conversation, and to be curious more about my own reactivity in those much more difficult situations, much more alien to me, exotic to me situations.
I mean, the fact that you were able to do that to me is very interesting when I look at the writing of this book, because you've managed to do that. You've managed to every now and then interject just how hateful some of the stuff is. I mean, the creationists going on about the homosexual agenda. That's not, it's hard to be tolerant of that.
Yes.
But then you also, the next minute you're exchanging pleasantries with them. And that to me is one of the most chilling things about not just this book, but life, is that what I guess the banality of evil, that, it's not like you look over there and say that person's a monster and that person is not. There are a few who are, but for the most part, it's just really ordinary. And it's chilling and lovely the way you do that. And I think that's definitely 2 roots in your book,
Yeah, I mean, thank you. But I think it's also like, we almost doubt ourselves when we encounter it in real life. Evil, as a categorical concept, it doesn't, come with horns. It comes with, bureaucratic language, and it comes with, social gatherings and that, happen on a weekend and the kids are there. And that makes it so much scarier, so much more powerful, but perhaps a little bit more easier when you to try to counter. Mm-hmm. If it happens, at that personal level, and all institutional decisions are really just billions of personal relational decisions, then if we can start thinking about that difference in those terms, perhaps we can start to make some progress that we haven't yet, or not. Maybe we're just locked into these different divisions.
Well, I agree with you that would help, but it's also much more uncomfortable, right? Because you're sitting with duality all the time. It's much more comfortable to have the other. And it's interesting because while you've done everything to bring these people into the human pantheon, it's still, just picking people who don't have kind of regular beliefs instantly puts an us against them thing. And then last night at 2:00, I woke up and I suddenly thought, wait a minute, actually, we're all cracked. We're all, look at you and me. We might say the creationists are off their heads, but we actually believe that if you take a pen and write on a piece of paper, it makes a difference in the world, So it's interesting how we don't see it in ourselves.
But it's also that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a wonderful thing. I mean, that kind of at the time, delusional self-confidence that we're going to use math to land a human on the moon. I mean, if we didn't have this faith in our own capacities, we wouldn't have made such huge progress, throughout history. But it's that same kind of faith function, that desire to be connected to something larger than ourselves, that is responsible for, so many hateful turns in human history and mass pain. And we're seeing it now in Ukraine. We don't, need to discuss it in the abstract at all.
Right.
And yet we insist on using this otherwise magical power for bad.
It's true. And the other stunning thing I find very much more in this book than the Trauma Cleaner actually is the way that you're so serious, but in the middle, you're so funny. Anyone who's watching, don't think this is going to be some kind of grim read, because I just, I have pages and pages of notes of some of the really, like you have the woman in the Creationist Museum, the terrible scientist, Georgia. And she said something like, that people should believe that the world is 6,000 years old. She says, it's plain, it's in scripture, it's not rocket science. And I just that was too good. And then the other thing you do to really bring the reader in is you talk a lot about your body's response. You're very physical. You talk about emotions going through you. You talk about people's bodies. When Katrina is dying, you said Peter looked out the window, his eyes were like tunnels. It's really moving. So was it a very physical act, the research of this book for you?
Well, I will answer the physical question, but then I want to ask you something about humor in your work as well, because that is incredibly inspiring for me. And you've modeled something very important, particularly in the last book. But the physical stuff, that is kind of a work in progress for me. I think, like many people who attend book events and support our local independent bookstores and are interested in literary nonfiction, so those of us who are driven to read, and probably a little bit more so in those of us who are driven to write, we have a tendency to fly up into our heads and rely on our cognitive capacities for sense making to fix all of these problems that really don't have a solution. And, the line between making things better in your head and really traumatic rumination is a very thin line. And so dutifully following the guidance of my therapist, I do try to put down the thought loop or the tendency to fix it in my head or make sense of something or understand. Like I say in the introduction to this book, one of the lies writers tell themselves is that everything can be understood. So put it all down in my head and come back below the neck and check in with what's driving me, up there in the first place. We could just breathe with it. We can't eliminate everything that's uncomfortable, but we can breathe through it and the discomfort will eventually pass. This is something that I learned a lot from Annie as well. Mm-hmm. So the physical side is very interesting, particularly, if you live an intellectualized life, coming back to that shared biology of not being built to tolerate discomfort. And in the end, we're really not even built to tolerate much introspection. One of my favorite podcasts I was listening to the other day is This Jungian Life. And I forget which one of the therapists said it, but they're like, we're built to flee from predators. We're really not built to, have self-reflection. And so if you have some kind of like looking again at the quality of your own thoughts and your impulse to do it in the first place, you perhaps will get, somewhere faster if you can just drop the story. And I say this as somebody who loves story. Drop it and come back to, breathing and just experiencing how it feels in the body. And that might be a little bridge that can connect us. The humor point, I always think that telling a story with the full human register of somberness when it's called for, seriousness when it's called for, and humor when it's there is the most respectful way of capturing the full contextual reality of human action. There are, and that's kind of the banality at the end of the day, is that there's always humor in any situation. If you stay in it long enough, that's just humans and the folly of being alive on the planet. And if I can point that out, I feel like I'm doing more justice to the situation. And also it's kind of an act of, I guess, refusal to accept the standard narrative. In your last book, it is so lighthearted in places that it is a radical tone. And that's what I think makes it so effective. It's a book on a topic that people find so confronting. I can't believe we don't have more books on this topic. And you were not only unflinching, but you were, humorous in parts and pointing out things that you didn't agree with or that were nonsensical or had no place in the discourse. And was that something that you did deliberately? I mean, were people uncomfortable with it? Because it is so radical.
Well, the thing is, it was my biggest fear. It's interesting. And I wonder if you thought that about your book too. My biggest fear was that when I was making the point that rape doesn't have to be the end of the world, I didn't want to go to the other extreme and I didn't want anyone, especially survivors, to think I was taking it lightly or being frivolous. But the thing is, I know I agree with you exactly. Some of the worst things in life, you're not laughing because you're nervous, you're laughing because it's actually funny. It's funny. And that's just how it is. And so what I did was I wrote the book and then I had people I really trusted look at it and tell me the parts that really should be taken out, because maybe if you know me, you think it's fine, but otherwise no. So it came naturally, but I definitely had it checked out. No, but I agree with you completely. It's like the other thing is if you start taking yourself seriously, nobody else will. They just won't. Because nobody likes a pompous ass, basically.
No, it's true. It's true. And I think it's sometimes the most subversive thing you can do is to refuse to play along with that narrative about not only what something is factually, but, how we have to act around it. That's maybe the most powerful stance at the end of the day. Maybe.
It's interesting how you bring together the humor, the bits of judgment which are just in time to save you from being superhuman. And then also the way you've woven in, it's really about these 6 different people and communities, but it's also fascinating how you bring your own life in at certain times. I mean, I was struck with how you brought in your history, especially your history with your parents, your mother, and then you also touched on your Jewish identity in several places, not just personally, but I think I don't know if it was the Mennonites or the creationists who believed in it was the alienists who believed that a race of lizards, some of whom were Jewish, were going to come and
yes.
So yes. I just wonder how you manage bringing all that together, putting yourself in and knowing when not to.
Right. I wish there was I had a answer to this, but it's never a bright line between when to do it and when to not. And, I think that I'm asking people often, so the people that I'm most interested in writing about self-select in a way that I never chase anyone. I never argue for why they should share something with me. If they're not into it, they're not into it. Right. And so those that are into it are quite open mostly. And, it's important to me as well to have continuing conversations over time so that duration becomes an aspect of the work and I can see character over time. And so again, that fosters an environment in which they are opening up more and more and becoming very vulnerable. And I think ethically, if I'm there right alongside them, truly listening and applying it to my own life and being honest about how I might not have felt exactly the same way or have gone through exactly the same thing, but how do I know what they're speaking about? What experiences am I drawing on? So if I can put myself in the book, I think that's a more honest way of writing about the lives of others. But also, and again, I always say this, but I should think by now I would learn this quote, but it's Janet Malcolm, and I'm now, constantly butchering it. But, factual writing is always partial and subjective and selective. We do our best, but it's not the granular second by second CCTV footage of life. It's the story of life. So given that subjectivity, if I'm on the page as well, and the reader can see the filter through which all the information is running, i.e. me, then they might be better equipped to decide to see themselves in me and come along, or decide that they don't agree, which is also fine. But that's why I'm constantly drawing on my own experience. And, I don't love doing it. a very private person. I like the remove of the page. And it's quite frightening. But I also, that goes back to the first part, it's frightening for them as well. So,
That's right.
There we are on the page and we're there together.
And I think part of what saves us is that we don't actually believe anyone's going to read it. And then we're surprised.
And then here we are now talking in public in our fancy clothes.
Really. There was another thing that really, many things that struck me about the book, but one of these sentences, in one place you say, it's important to understand why we need magical thinking, more important than calling it out. And your book kind of does that. It tries to understand magical thinking. It's not necessarily accusing. Can you talk about that a little bit, where that comes from, that emotion of?
Well, I mean, I really think that, so I have a page where I go through all the cognitive biases that we are wired for, our confirmation bias and all these other forms of how the brain sees and then unsees. And that's, the realm of, scientific journalism, but it's also very interesting to me from a psychological perspective. And it was the note that was hitting in each of these stories again and again and again, that if they didn't act to defend these very neat narratives about why we were here and why bad things happen and what happens after we die, then they would have to start revising their fundamental self-concept and the fundamental concept of their relationships and those that had offered authoritative guidance in their lives, maybe their first families, maybe, schools or the community around them. And that is annihilating. To have to confront that, the brain is wired to ignore these things for a very specific reason that preserves belonging over accuracy. And, maybe that's just our biological fate. But I don't want to believe that. And that's why I'm a believer, the same as any of these people. I believe in our ability to see and then look again and really question our thinking. And that's why we know we have words for these biases. We know when they happen. We're quick to point them out when it's someone else, less quick when it's ourselves. And maybe if we could all hold each other to account in this way and sit with each other through that fire, on the other side of all these perfect stories and these, ideal images of the world and ourselves, there would be something that would open up life to all of us in a much safer, enriching way. And maybe we're so close to it, but also so far away. That's a long way of not answering it, but I'm sorry, I forgot what the question was, Sohaila. No, okay.
You answered it really well, actually.
Thank you.
So and the other thing, to get a little bit back to the physicality part of it, it's not just that to me, it seems very real when you talk about some emotion out there or belief, and then you immediately locate it in your own body, because it's making the kind of connection you talk about in your book. For instance, there's a place where you say, someone says something to you and you said, something clinks inside me, no greater than ice in a glass, but just as clear. You often have these visceral responses. And it seems like that makes a really nice connection because we're all physical. So
that's right. We all have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and often, the body knows before the mind can wish it away. So we're taught not to think about, we're taught not to respect those responses. We're taught to kind of wish things away and think things away and ignore discomfort, ignore self-doubt. And the more we do that, and the more we pin ourselves in environments that encourage that, the greater our susceptibility to very dangerous ideologies. We've known that for, at least 125 years. Of psychoanalytical theory, and yet we unsee it on a daily basis in ourselves and in the headlines. And every time we discover it, it's like, reinventing the wheel. But we always think these things are things that happen to other people only.
Which brings me very nicely to one of the quotes that you use in the very prologue that hooked me right away, where you said, psychological distance is our superpower and our Achilles heel, a way of flying or falling. And that, for some reason, that seems to sum up the whole book, but I'm not sure I could explain it as well as you. This whole concept of psychological distance.
So it was this idea that something that's very far away in time or space can feel very close to us, and someone sitting right next to us can feel like 1,000 light years away. And we have this ability in our mind to, leap over distance if we want to open up those empathic, imaginative capacities. If we close them down, then, you might as well be talking to me from Mars. And, right now I feel very close to you. I feel I know you well enough to feel the warmth of you in the room, and we're on different continents.
Right.
And you must have this experience on a daily basis because of your family in India. And so we can feel very far away because we are physically far away, but in many ways we keep those that we love and respect and honor inside of us. And so, there was this constant kind of a tug when I was listening to the more hateful stories or more implausible stories that it's a quite a frightening thing when you realize how quickly somebody can just shut that compassionate side down, and what wonderful reserves of almost like magical distance crossing capacities we carry with us, but we don't access them often. So seeing Annie in action, I mean, I don't like, I've said it before that, I spoke to Annie about her death doula work for 2 years, and I thought I understood it. I only understood it intellectually, though. When I finally saw her working with Katrina, and being with Katrina in the final weeks of her life, I experienced it somatically, is the only way to describe it, in a way that just short-circuited all of that intellectual understanding, opened up the ability to see myself in them. And I understood what it took to do that work and the demand for it, the universal demand for that work, in a way that the words weren't doing. So I think we have this wonderful ability, and it doesn't need to be, and this I think is one of the motivating things that I was trying to do in the book, what doesn't need to be just with those that we have lots in common with. We group things, and Gestalt psychology has been doing this for nearly 100 years as well. We group things reflexively by simple, stupid proximity or likeness. That's our perceptual shorthand for, oh, you're worth having compassion for, or you're worth listening to because we read the same books or went to the same school or have the same skin color or whatever. That's the thing. But again, there are always different possibilities within all of those undifferentiated parts of the whole. And Gestalt psychology is always, you can look again, you can think again, you can reach a little bit deeper and have the same reaction across distance. And so when I'm sitting there in the Creation Museum, listening to a geologist try to tell me that the world is 6,000 years old, and arguing about that and why all of Scripture needs to be true, knowing that this man has signed his employer's statement of faith, which includes the statement that homosexuality is the devil and they're going to hell, and all of these other statements on difference. Can I sit there and use what I know about that human susceptibility to absolute opinions and authority figures to wonder about what his experience was like as a child? And when he tells me he had a very strict religious upbringing, and when he talks about his parents and who his idols were when he was a young boy and a teenager, and what it felt like when he started accruing knowledge in his field and how that functioned for him, can I feel in myself that tug of similarity, that compassion in myself when everything is screaming otherwise? So yeah, I mean, it's difficult work. It's not something that's very hard for me, but if I could even get a little bit better at it, then I think that would be a huge gift.
I think you are better at it. I think you've done a fantastic job of it. It's kind of like what you're fighting against is a very, if I may say it, a Western concept of binary.
Yes.
It's one
yes,
or the
absolutely.
other. Whereas it's actually possible to feel really affectionate towards the Mennonite, the women, Becky, and all those people. And they were affectionate towards you, even though they knew 100% that you're going to hell and that you're a sinner and you're just wrong and you're barely human. And yet there's that connection, and we actually have all that in our daily lives and we don't recognize it. I look at India right now, where I know this man who's very pro Hindutva, which is an anti-Muslim, kill them all thing. And he believes that. And he's a good friend and he likes me. And he just doesn't really get the connect that, he can hold both those opinions at the same. I can hate his views, but I kind of like him. I can't condemn him as the devil, even though he might support a mob that might murder my family one day. So it's odd.
But we have no hope. I mean, if we just we know that these arguments at a rational level don't get anywhere. And then we know that and we do it harder. Perhaps we need to get off that track and think about a different way. And maybe it does start with talking about the weather or, bitching about the traffic or whatever is nice in this guy that, charms you. We have to start somewhere.
Did you feel like after you wrote it, was it like, I know with the trauma cleaner, you were really close to the woman and it didn't end so well with her. How did everybody read the book, and do you have responses from the people in the book?
Well, I don't have responses from everybody. And I always try, you're always trying when you write about other people's lives to balance, what it says on the front of the book or the shelf. This is nonfiction. This is, you're getting a real story, true facts. And that contract with your reader is holy. And I don't think, I still, again, maybe it's on my own belief, but I don't think that should be fully incompatible with presenting the whole context for a person's decisions that others might not agree with or might judge them for or condemn as bad or immoral or mean or what have you. I always thought that if you include the whole context for a person's actions, that you would create in the reader the same sympathy that you were seeing. And perhaps that was naive. It's not always possible. People are going to understand someone's life in the way they're going to understand it. So, you try to do the best you can to balance both of those competing and sometimes diametrically opposed goals. And, you have to sit in the discomfort if someone doesn't agree that you've done it, as they would have done it. But, my dictaphone's always out, my notebook's always out. I'm honest about, I haven't been hired to ghostwrite anything. This is my understanding of your life, and you do the best that you can. But it's a messy area.
It is, and you've done a fantastic job. Even the people who hold beliefs I completely find repugnant, I felt a certain tug for every single one of them. So I think you've done an amazing job. I see Paula's back.
I am. Great discussion. I think I warned everybody, the audience coming into this was going to be a completely different type of discussion because of the book. And it's just so different. A really interesting research, Sarah, and I really appreciate it. Like you said, you may not agree with what these people believe, but it's interesting to see how they got to that point. And you did
thanks, Paula.
Kind of presenting it that way. We do have some audience questions as well as my own. We'll see if we get to mine. More important, we get to the audience questions. This is from Marie. She wants to know, how many people did you, Sarah, interview before you chose the 6 that you focused on for the book?
It's such a good question. And, I don't know who said this as well, but it's the idea that you've got to use a lot of milk to get the cream. So for all the stories that I find and that have legs and, the arc to be a book length thing as opposed to a magazine piece, there's probably 10 that I've tried to get off the ground or thought of doing or really wanted to do, but didn't work out. So, I would say that but this one, the story, like the book is because they are. So I didn't say I'm going to write about belief. I was following my own curiosity that day about the Mennonite families. They told me about the Creation Museum. I thought, how else could we think about death and injustice. Does it need to be in the framework of scripture? Might there be another way of looking at death? I found Annie. So each of these stories led on to the next in a way that was quite natural, and that they all made a similar sound to me. They had the same kind of vibe or feel. And so, with one exception of a story on cults that didn't make it in, everyone that I followed was the reason that this book is the book it is. So the book is because of them. So this is the long way of answering the question is one story that I had hoped to put in, but apart from that, it was pretty consistent with these 6 stories.
Yeah, and I could be getting this wrong. I think Marie wants to know, did you start off with like 20 people and whittle it down to 6, or like, do you have a number like that, or was it just you went organically with what you were?
It was the latter, Paul. I was like, basically, these were the stories that I was looking at pretty consistently over the years. I spent a week with the creationists, but apart from that, it was revisiting each of these people over months and years. And each of them was kind of in play the whole time. So I didn't kind of have a blue sky of who I would interview for the book. It was looking again and again and again of why I was drawn to these stories, why to me they had the similarity at their heart, and what I could do if I braided them together. So yeah, it started with these 6, one other one that could have been as well, but it ended with those 6 as well.
Gotcha. Okay, and then we have a question from Kath. Do you believe people can change long-held religious or political beliefs?
I absolutely believe that that's possible. And I'm saying that because I have enough experience in my own life and with people in my circle, my community, my friends, having to move out of very small boxes of constricting beliefs. And they were either about what was going on in their first families or families of origin that they had just kind of tolerated for too long at, great detriment, or the religions in which they were raised in a very strict paradigm, and sometimes politically as well, things that they had been raised to adhere to. And through their own curiosity about the world or through their own connections with others, the home that they managed to make for themselves in a world that was bigger than that story, they felt confident to listen to that little voice that had always been saying this is not good enough inside them. So they could undo that self-doubt. They could actually see unflinchingly, and they could walk through that fire of what it would look like to surrender what felt at first to be an absolutely necessary narrative about who they were and who the world was. So I absolutely believe that's possible. I don't believe that most people have the support in their communities or their relationships or discourse in culture generally to feel confidently held enough to walk through that fire. But if we provided people with that kind of emotional support or a sense of a real community, I think we could see it more often.
Interesting. And I'm going to kind of piggyback off of that. Are people, did you notice a certain age that people came to question beliefs or engage in a particular belief? Were most born and raised into it? And or if you were going to change your beliefs, did you find kind of a common thread, like an age range where that, like maybe going to college and like that? I'm just curious about age.
No, it's such an interesting question. I mean, it was less correlated with age than it was hitting rock bottom and really not being able to unsee the accepted dogma, because it was just so objectively, blatantly, audaciously awful, or having been, through their own goodness and their own kind of self and spirit, found a hold in the world and created a security for themselves that they could unflinchingly look. So either things getting good or things getting very bad. And it seemed to shake out around the late 20s, but it happened, across all ages. It was a learning process, and it had, that it had to have either those exterior conditions or those interior conditions. Yeah.
Yeah. And another question from me, I may be putting this the wrong way, but I'm assuming that some of your writing probably did overlap into like the Trump era.
Yes.
And
correct.
I'm wondering, because that was in our society, it was such a divisive time. Obviously more on social issues and political issues than religious, I think, maybe also religious. But did you notice that kind of having any influence in the research, the writing, or the people that you were engaging with, just what was going on kind of politically at that time?
Absolutely, Paula. The first month of immersion with the Mennonite families was November 2016. And I write about in the book going over to their house just to hang out and to talk the day after Election Day and what that felt like. And for me, there was a radiating sense of shame. And that had to do with the shock that I felt when, if we looked around at what was happening in all institutional parts of society on a daily basis, it was quite logical that that was the outcome. And I felt shocked and ashamed of myself for that shock, because I myself had been seeing and then unseeing in an unjustified hope that this would all just shake out, in a way that was the opposite from what actually happened. So it was in real time showing all of the secondary reading, 1951, Eric Hoffer's True Believer, 6 years after World War II ended, or, Freud writing 20 years before World War II. And we know what happens then when we have, self-doubt and the desire to project our own discomforts onto anybody else. And we had living examples all over on a daily basis before we had the 2016 example. And I felt ashamed of myself for not seeing what was around me. So that was a very useful way of cracking open kind of these perceptual shorthands and cognitive biases that I had in my own life, so that I could see them, whether they were presenting in a religious framework, were they presenting in a paranormal framework, were they presenting in a framework about the way that the justice system works. And again and again, human susceptibility to influence when we feel disempowered in times of anxiety, the most dangerous thing in the world.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. I almost feel sorry for you that you had to start you said the day of or the day after, just to get your head in the right space. It had to be challenging, We were all kind of reeling from the result.
Yeah.
Well, great conversation. Sohaila, I bet you're going to be busy coming up this month and next month, just given the topic of your book. And I know April is domestic violence or domestic violence awareness and things like that. And maybe you can give us some thoughts since we're in Women's History Month and we're going into, a month which will have some focus on domestic violence.
Well, I'm glad it does, but I don't think of rape at all as a women's issue. Seems to me like, if anything, it's a men's issue. So it's true that we might talk about it more at this time, but it's always a topic of discussion. Actually, I'm very interested to see what happens with things like rape laws now that things are changing with gender dynamics. That is something that people are talking about a lot now that, we might not recognize marital rape. What happens when the first husband accuses a husband of raping him? It might not be quite so easy to dismiss. So I'm waiting and watching to see. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just wanted to recommend Sohaila's book, What We Talk About When We Talk About Rape, to anybody there is a operating misperception in publishing that dark topics, it's not the true crime. We can make a lot of, podcasts and endless docu-series about it. But a book about these things that we're all universally susceptible to, whether it's, how we die or interpersonal sexual violence, that won't capture the public imagination. People are scared of it. It's the least scary book. It is the most clever and beautiful with so much heart. And it is a tool for daily living. You will feel stronger having had this insight into the strength of so many people. And the way she shares the information is utterly unique. She is just dances on the page. So I really can't recommend that book enough.
Oh, Sarah, you're so sweet.
Please.
No, it's true though. It's true. It's very interesting and engaging, and just like you said, Sarah, it's not what you would think. And people hear about the topic of a book and it's like, oh no, what a downer. And it's like, no, sometimes most of the most life-affirming books about human condition and challenges and overcoming and everything. Yeah.
Well, in a way, we kind of write about the same thing because we talk about how we relate. It's really about that. How do we relate to each other? Everyone in your book, from the woman who held on for 60 years for her boyfriend who disappeared, to the people who believe that, the ghost is coming in the door now and we have to talk to him. To me, who's talking about how do boys and girls talk to each other? How do they have joyous sex instead of abusive? It's really the same thing. We're all trying to connect.
We're all trying to connect, and we always have choice in whatever happens to us. I've got a 7-year-old, and I always say to him, can't protect him from the news. We never had any control about the world, what's happening, but we can control how we respond to it. And I think that's in your writing. I hope that it's in mine, that we are not what happens to us. Our story is a totally different matter. And the agency that we exercise over that can unite us or it can divide us. And maybe we should be doing this better.
Yeah, to be able to tell our story the way we want to, and to be able to, as important as telling the story is listening to people's stories, which I think you do beautifully in your book, because even when, I don't know, the technical term is maybe batshit crazy, I'm not sure. Even when someone is that way, the fact that you can be open to them and listen to them and hear the things, the reasons why they might be believing what they believe, and see the truth even in the middle of the madness. That's what connection is. It doesn't mean you believe the same things. It's what you said. It's the emotion at the bottom of it. So I think you've fun. Everyone buy this book immediately.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, really, this event just kind of touched on in a great way what the book is about, but to experience it, reading it is a whole different thing. I mean, it's great from beginning to end, or listening to it if you get your books from audio. Speaking of getting the books, we do have plenty of Sarah's book, The Believer, at Book Passage, both locations, our San Francisco store, our Corte Madera store. And we want people in the Bay Area to feel free to come in safely and interact with the booksellers, support Book Passage, support our authors tonight by purchasing their books and passing them along, or buying a few to pass along. Feel free also to call in or order online, no matter where you are. You can definitely do that. We actually have some signed books from Sarah. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to assume that they're probably book plates, which is fantastic. Yes. And I also believe we do have some first editions. So that would equal signed first editions. So I really encourage for our audience members to take advantage of that and make themselves available to that. So thank you to both of you for coming on, having this wonderful conversation, very enlightening, very engaging. And thank you, audience, for supporting this event and all our events, and supporting independent bookstores and these wonderful authors. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Book Passage people. Bye. Thanks, Paula. Bye, guys.
you.